And speaking of dangers to kids, 36-year-old Samuel Flores de Dios came into our country illegally in 2005, and he was deported back to Mexico. He snuck back in illegally at some point, where, according to the Justice Department, he repeatedly sexually abused a victim who was under the age of 13 years old. He did this in a rented bedroom where he had set up several different cell phones to film his sexual abuse of this poor child from all angles. One of the many videos that were made of this persistent sexual abuse showed him allowing a second man to also sexually abuse this poor child. On June 24th, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison for producing child sexual abuse material, otherwise known as child pornography, after which he will theoretically be on parole for the rest of his life and have to register as a sex offender. But unless this country loses its mind and puts irresponsible people in power again, he will actually be deported by ICE as soon as he sets foot outside of that prison. And he should be. I give other people out there credit for being sane enough to assume that we agree on at least this. We do not need to import pedophiles in the name of immigration. Claiming otherwise is a truly vile insult to actual immigrants out there. So stop hiding behind their skirts. Thankfully, according to the Richmond Times-Dispatch, authorities in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, learned about the abuse that this illegal was perpetrating during a visit by a deputy on April 8th. That was when the deputy found a 12-year-old little girl in the home who was brave enough to indicate to him that she was being sexually assaulted by Flores de Dios. He denied abusing her, while also admitting that he did have a photo on his phone of another man who lived in the same house sexually abusing her. So, to sum up, the best case scenario of even that fraudulent claim is that he just admitted that he saw another man raping a child, pulled out his phone, took a picture of it, saved that picture to excite himself with whenever he wanted to, and did nothing to help the child. That's his story. The authorities arrested the other man, 21-year-old Alberto Cocteck, that same day and charged him with raping a child under the age of 13 years old. According to the court records, a Spotsylvania grand jury indicted Cocteck in July of 2025. His case remains ongoing, but in November of 2025, Flores de Dios pled guilty to a local charge of possessing child pornography for the photo that he admitted to having. That plea agreement resulted in a 1-year prison sentence. And then apparently they found the tapes, proving the little girl's original accusations to be true. The Department of Homeland Security is pledging to deport Flores de Dios whenever he is released from prison, and they lodged a detainer to that effect in January as part of the removal process. The Assistant Secretary for that department, Lauren Biss, promised, once his sentence is complete, we will remove him from our country so that he can never harm another innocent child. Under President Trump and Secretary Mullen, we are putting the safety of the American people first. Meanwhile, Minnesota's Board of Pardons decided to grant clemency to a highly dangerous criminal who was convicted in a court of law of repeatedly raping a 10-year-old little girl. They seem to have made this move to grant him clemency all in order to interfere with his removal from this country based on his crimes here. So to be clear, they would rather unleash a violent pedophile on their neighbors' children for ideological reasons than to allow even that kind of foreigner to be deported. For the record, the board that made this decision includes the Democrat governor, Tim Walz, the Democrat Attorney General, Keith Ellison, and the state Supreme Court Justice, Natalie Hudson, whom I'm sure would all want everyone to know the decision that they made on their behalf. They allegedly believe that it is the morally right one to make, and therefore they would want everyone to know that they did the right thing. So let's make sure that everyone knows what they did. And then all of those people can decide for themselves if they agree that this was the right thing to do. That is entirely fair. In fact, that is exactly how a democracy is supposed to work. You are supposed to know what you are really voting for. And then you get to vote for what you actually want and against the thing that you don't want. Trying to hide your record is only proof that you know full well that what you are doing is the wrong thing, and that you know that the people don't want you to do it. That is the only reason to hide it. In light of that, you should know that these are the people who are responsible for the vote on June 10th, which pardoned Thao Lu Vang, a citizen of Laos, not our problem, who lost his formerly legal immigration status after being convicted in 2006 for his first-degree sex crimes against a child. According to the court documents that were cited by DHS, Vang repeatedly sexually assaulted a little girl, raping her again and again through the years, continuing his repeated abuse from 2002 until 2004. The investigators in that case reported that he also tried to pay his child victim $10 to stay silent about the abuse that he had committed against her, proving that he knew that it was illegal and morally wrong. There is nothing that is even debatable about this case. The court records show that during a police interview, Vang didn't even deny what he did. He justified it by claiming that it was a cultural thing to marry and then to have sex with girls as young as 12 years old, which would still be older than his victim. And then he argued that his victim should be arrested. After losing his legal status as a result of his conviction for these vile crimes, he was issued a final order of removal by an immigration judge that same year, as is entirely appropriate. Ever since then, Vang has had the entitled audacity to refuse to accept our right to make that decision. An illegitimate option that was finally taken away from him at the start of this administration. You don't get to decide whether you accept that or not. Final order of removal is final order of removal. And feds say that he was on the verge of being deported when Democrats went out of their way to save this violent pedophile through their pardon. The Ramsey County Attorney's Office, which prosecuted the original case, opposed this heinous move. Those prosecutors argued that Vang's offense was exceptionally serious, and they pointed out that Vang had already received a very lenient sentence for his crimes, in part because the child victim, who was 12 when the case was prosecuted, faced pressure from family members not to cooperate with the authorities. So a lot of people have been shielding this guy at the expense of the child, and Democrats decided that was also the position they wanted to take. Like the Assistant Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security, Lauren Biss, said, Governor Tim Walz's decision to pardon an illegal alien convicted child rapist so that he can remain in our country is disgusting. These are the criminal illegal aliens he and his Minnesota sanctuary politicians are protecting. Following the conviction, he was placed in removal proceedings and issued a final order of removal by a judge. This pardon will take away this child rapist's qualifying convictions that made him removable from the United States. DHS also made it clear that pardoning a pedophile so that he wouldn't be rightfully deported is part of a much broader pattern. Minnesota's Clemency Review Commission previously approved a pardon for another citizen of Laos whose criminal history included armed robbery against our people and drunk driving that endangered all of our neighbors. Whether this pardon will ultimately succeed in preventing Vang from being deported remains to be seen. That will be determined in the immigration courts. But voters need to remember that either way, Democrat politicians were willing to endanger their children and subject them to sexual abuse in order to prevent even a pedophile from being rightfully deported. And they need to vote accordingly. So unless those are your priorities too, the prioritization of foreign pedophiles and the desire to import them here and shield them from consequences at the expense of tiny kids and innocent women on the streets, unless that is a bigger priority to you than your children, you need to remember that the Democrats have openly signaled that that is exactly the way that their priorities are arranged, and they will act on them if you vote to give them power.